In the bustling urban kingdom of Adinkra, where towering palm trees sway over mud brick homes and golden markets hum with life, a poor village girl named Aqua is forced into a marriage with Kofi, a humble yam farmer. Unbeknownst to her, Kofi hides a secret, is a millionaire who inherited wealth from a forgotten royal lineage. Through trials, trickery by Anansi the spider, and the wisdom of ancestors, Akua discovers her husband's true identity and learns the value of humility, patience, and inner wealth. The tale weaves suspense, vibrant African traditions, and a moral about looking beyond appearances. In the kingdom of Adinkra, where the sun rose like a great golden drum over the rolling hills, the land hummed with life. The urban heart of the kingdom was a sprawling tapestry of mud brick homes, topped with thatched roofs, their walls painted with swirling patterns of white and ochre. Towering palm trees stretched their fronds toward the sky, casting dappled shadows over the dusty streets, while the distant bleating of goats mingled with the laughter of children. At the center of it all lay the great market, a pulsing, breathing beast of color and sound that drew people from every corner of the land. The market was a marvel to behold. Stalls lined the winding paths, their wooden frames groaning under the weight of goods, pyramids of mangoes, their skins glistening like the sun itself, baskets of kola nuts, red and bitter, and bolts of kente cloth woven with threads of crimson, gold, and indigo, shimmering as if kissed by the ancestors. Traders shouted their wares, their voices rising above the steady thump of djembe drums that echoed from a circle of musicians near the baobab tree. The air was thick with the scent of roasted plantains, spicy groundnut stew, and the faint tang of palm wine fermenting in clay jars. Women in bright head wraps balanced baskets on their heads, swaying as they walked, while men in flowing agbadas bartered with cowrie shells, their laughter ringing like bells. At the edge of this vibrant chaos stood Aqua, a girl of 16 summers, her bare feet planted firmly in the red dust. Her dress was a simple wrap of faded blue cotton, patched at the hem where thorns had snagged it during her treks to fetch water. Her hands gripped a basket woven from raffia, its edges frayed from years of use. Aqua's hair was plaited into tight rows that gleamed with a touch of shea butter, and her eyes wide and bright as the full moon darted across the market, not with wonder, but with a quiet desperation. Today was no ordinary day. Today, her fate had been sealed. That morning, as the roosters crowed and the first light crept through the cracks of their mud hut, Mame Efwa, Aqua's mother, had sat her down by the fire. Mama Efwa was a woman of strength, her hands calloused from years of pounding yam and her face lined with the wisdom of 50 rains. She stirred a pot of groundnut stew, the steam curling upward like spirits rising to the sky, and spoke in a voice as firm as the earth beneath their feet. "Akua, my child," she said, her eyes fixed on the bubbling stew. "The time has come. We are poor. The rains have failed us these past 2 seasons. The yams have withered in the fields, and our storehouse is emptier than a gourd in the dry season. The ancestors have spoken through the diviner's shells. You must marry Kofi, the yam farmer. He is a good man, even if he has little." Akua's heart dropped like a stone into the river. Kofi? The quiet man who lived on the edge of the village, his hands rough from digging in the soil, his straw hat always tilted over his brow? She had seen him in the fields, bent over his hoe, his tunic patched worse than her own dress, his hut smaller than the one she shared with Mama Efua. She had dreamed of more of a life, where she could wear kente cloth that shimmered like the stars, dance at the king's festival with bells on her ankles, and live in a
house with walls that didn't crumble in the rain. But Mame Efua's word was law, rooted in the traditions of their people and the whispers of the ancestors. To defy her was to defy the spirits themselves. "Mother, please," Akua had pleaded, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Kofi has nothing. I will be trapped in poverty forever. Is there no other way?" Mame Efua's spoon paused mid-stir, and she turned her sharp gaze on her daughter. "The ancestors do not care for gold or grand houses, Akua. They care for the heart. Kofi is steady, like the baobab that stands through storms. You will see." And with that, she returned to her stew, the matter closed. Now, in the market, Akua lingered by a stall of beads, their colors glinting like tiny stars in the sunlight. She ran her fingers over a string of amber beads, imagining them around her neck, a symbol of a different life. She could run, she thought. Slip away with the traders' caravans that stretched beyond the horizon, their camels laden with salt and spices. She could hide in the hills where the leopards roamed, free from the weight of her mother's will. But then, a sound broke her reverie, a sharp, sly cackle that made her spin around. There, perched on a crate of mangoes, was Anansi, the trickster spider. His 8 legs gleamed black as the night sky, and his eyes twinkled with mischief, like embers in a dying fire. A faint web shimmered behind him, catching the light in delicate threads. Anansi was no ordinary spider. He was a creature of legend, a weaver of tales and a spinner of schemes, known across Adinkra for his cunning. "Akua, Akua," Anansi sang, his voice a teasing hum that danced on the breeze. "Why so glum? The market is alive with wonders, yet your face is as sour as unripe pawpaw. What troubles my favorite village girl?" Akua clutched her basket tighter, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Leave me be, Anansi," she snapped. "I am to marry Kofi, a man with nothing but a hoe and a hut. My dreams are dust, and you have no business poking your legs into my sorrow." Anansi scuttled closer, his web swaying as he moved. "Nothing, you say? The eyes see only what they wish, my dear. Perhaps Kofi is more than he seems. Perhaps he hides a secret bigger than the king's palace. Or perhaps I could help you for a price." He grinned, showing tiny, sharp teeth that glinted like knives. Akua frowned, her heart skipping a beat. Everyone knew Anansi's help came with tricks. Tales abounded of farmers who traded their best cow for his aid, only to find their fields overrun with locusts. "I want no part of your schemes," she said, turning away. But his words lingered like smoke, curling around her thoughts. Could Kofi be more? No, she decided. He was just a poor farmer, as plain as the dirt he tilled. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of pink and purple, and the crickets began their evening song, a chorus that rose from the grasses. Mame Efua came to fetch Akua, her stride purposeful, her head wrap a bold splash of yellow against the fading light. "Come, child," she said. "The elders wait." They walked to the village square, a wide circle of packed earth surrounded by huts and shaded by a massive baobab tree. The elders had gathered, their staffs tapping the ground in rhythm, their robes flowing like rivers of white and brown. The diviner, an old woman with eyes clouded by age, sat cross-legged with a mat before her, a pile of cowrie shells in her gnarled hands. Kofi stood there, his head bowed, his straw hat crooked on his brow. He was tall, with skin dark as ebony and hands rough as tree bark. His tunic was frayed at the edges, and his eyes avoided Akua's, fixed instead on the ground. The diviner tossed the cowrie shells, and they clattered to the mat, scattering like stars fallen from the sky. She studied them, her fingers tracing their curves, then nodded. "The ancestors approve," she declared, her voice a raspy whisper. "The marriage is set for the next full moon." A murmur rippled through the crowd, approval from some, pity from others. Aqua's throat tightened, a scream trapped behind her teeth. She wanted to run, to tear through the night and vanish into the hills, but the weight of tradition held her still, heavy as a millstone. The elders clapped their hands, sealing the betrothal, and the villagers dispersed, their chatter fading into the dusk. Kofi approached her then, his steps slow, his voice soft as the rustle of leaves. "I will try to be a good husband, Aqua," he said, his eyes lifting briefly to meet hers. There was a warmth there, a quiet strength, but she was too angry to see it. She nodded, her heart cold as the river at dawn. She did not notice the faint smile that tugged at his lips or the glint in his eye that hid a secret deeper than the roots of the baobab tree. The full moon hung low in the sky, a silver disk that bathed the village in a soft, ghostly light. The night of the wedding had arrived, and the air thrummed with the heartbeat of Adinkra's traditions. The village square, once quiet, now blazed with life. Torches flickered in a circle, their flames dancing like spirits freed from the earth. The demb drums pounded a rhythm that shook the ground, calling the ancestors to witness the union. Women ululated, their voices rising in sharp, joyous trills, while men clapped and stomped, their shadows leaping against the mud walls of the huts. Aqua stood at the center of it all, her heart a tangled knot of dread and resignation. Mame Ifua had dressed her in a borrowed gown of green cotton, its hem adorned with tiny cowrie shells that clinked as she moved. A head wrap of the same fabric crowned her plaits, and her wrists bore bangles of twisted grass, a gift from the village girls. She was beautiful, the elders whispered, but her eyes were dull, her spirit heavy. Across from her stood Kofi, his straw hat replaced with a simple cap of woven palm fibers, his tunic mended for the occasion but still patched at the elbows. He looked at her now, his gaze steady, but Aqua turned her face away, staring instead at the flames. The diviner stepped forward, her staff tapping the earth, and raised a gourd of palm wine to the sky. "Ancestors of Adinkra," she intoned, "bless this union. Let it grow strong like the baobab, fruitful like the yam fields, and enduring like the river that carves the land." She poured the wine onto the ground, a dark stain spreading in the dust, and the crowd cheered. Then, the dancing began. The women pulled Aqua into the circle, their hands gentle but firm. She moved stiffly at first, her feet dragging, but the drums were relentless, their beat sinking into her bones. Soon, she swayed with them, her arms rising like wings, the cowrie shells on her dress singing with each step. Kofi joined the men, his movements slow and deliberate, a quiet grace in his steps that surprised her. For a moment, their eyes met across the fire, and she saw something there, pride, perhaps, or hope, but she quickly looked away. The ceremony ended with offerings, a basket of yams from Kofi's fields, a clay pot of stew from Mame Ifua, and prayers whispered into the night. The elders tied a cord of braided grass around Aqua's wrist and Kofi's, binding them as one. "You are husband and wife," the diviner said, and the village erupted in song. The next morning, Aqua followed Kofi to his home, a tiny mud hut on the edge of the yam fields, its walls cracked from the sun, its roof a patchwork of thatch. Inside, the floor was swept clean, and a mat of woven reeds lay in one corner, beside a small stool and a clay water jar. A single iron pot hung over a cold fire pit. It was even poorer than her mother's hut, and Aqua's heart sank deeper. This was her life now, dust and toil, with no end in sight. The days that followed were quiet. Kofi rose at dawn to tend his fields, his hoe flashing in the early light, while Aqua fetched water from the stream, her back aching under the weight of the calabash. He spoke little, his words soft and few, but he was kind, sharing his meager meals of yam porridge, fixing the roof when it leaked. Yet Aqua's resentment grew, a bitter seed in her chest. She swept the hut with angry strokes, muttering to herself about the life she'd lost. Then, something strange began. One night, as the moon waned and the crickets sang, Kofi slipped out of the hut. Aqua, half asleep on the mat, heard the creak of the door and the rustle of his footsteps fading into the dark. She thought little of it, perhaps he checked the fields for pests. But when he returned at dawn, He carried a small sack of rice, its grains spilling onto the floor as he set it down. "Where did you get this?" Akua asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Rice was rare in their village, a luxury for traders, not farmers. Kofi shrugged, his eyes avoiding hers. "I found it by the stream," he said. "Someone must have dropped it." Akua frowned but said nothing. The next night, he left again, and this time he returned with a silver bangle, its surface etched with tiny stars. "Another find," he said, handing it to her. She slipped it onto her wrist, the cool metal a stark contrast to their dusty life, but her doubts grew. No one found such things so easily. On the third night, as Kofi slipped out once more, Akua sat by the fire, her mind buzzing like a hive. A cackle broke the silence, and she turned to see Anansi dangling from the roof, his web swaying in the breeze. "Trouble in the hut, eh?" he teased, his legs tapping a rhythm on the thatch. "Your husband wanders, and you sit here sweeping dust. Curious, curious. I know where he goes, Akua. I could show you, for a price." Akua's pulse quickened. "What price?" she asked, though she knew better than to trust him. Anansi's eyes gleamed. "Your mother's bead necklace, the one with the blue stones. Give it to me, and I'll spin you a tale of truth." The necklace was Mame Ifua's treasure, a gift from her own mother, worn only on festival days. Akua hesitated, her fingers brushing the bangle on her wrist. What was Kofi hiding? Was he a thief? A liar? The suspense gnawed at her, and Anansi's grin widened, sensing her weakness. "Fine," she said at last, her voice trembling. "Show me." Anansi chuckled, scuttling down his web. "Follow me, then, little wife. The night holds secrets bigger than you dream." Akua follows Anansi to a hidden cave in the hills, where she sees Kofi trading gold nuggets with shadowy traders. Shocked, she confronts him, but he denies it, claiming it's a misunderstanding. Anansi cackles, sowing doubt. That night, her grandmother's spirit visits in a dream, urging patience and warning against the trickster's lies. Akua wrestles with trust, her suspicions clashing with the ancestral wisdom, building suspense as she teeters on the edge of revelation. Anansi, angered by Akua's hesitation, spreads rumors that Kofi is a thief, inciting the village. At the king's court, Kofi reveals his true identity as a royal heir, proving it with a hidden seal. Akua learns humility, and the tale ends with a festival celebrating their union and the moral that true wealth lies in character, not gold. Anansi sulks, outsmarted. The night was thick with shadows as Akua followed Anansi through the yam fields, her bare feet silent on the cool earth. The moon had shrunk to a thin crescent, its light barely piercing the canopy of palm trees that loomed overhead. Crickets chirped a restless song, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, its call a warning that prickled Akua's skin. She clutched her mother's bead necklace in her fist, the blue stones warm against her palm, a heavy price for the truth she sought. Anansi scuttled ahead, his 8 legs a blur, his web trailing behind him like a silver thread in the dark. "Keep up, little wife," he sang, his voice a sly hum that danced on the breeze. "The night is short, and secrets wait for no one." Akua's heart pounded, a mix of fear and curiosity driving her forward. She had left Kofi's hut without a word, slipping out after Anansi's promise to reveal her husband's mystery. The silver bangle on her wrist glinted faintly, a reminder of the strange gifts Kofi brought home: rice, a bangle, things no poor farmer could find by chance. Was he a thief? A liar? Or something more? Anansi's words had wormed into her mind, and now she followed the trickster, her trust in him as fragile as a dry leaf. They left the fields behind, climbing into the hills that rose like sleeping giants beyond the village. The path grew steep, strewn with rocks and twisted roots that snagged at her dress. Anansi darted over them with ease, his laughter echoing off the stones. "Not far now," he called. "Oh, what a sight you'll see." At last, they reached a narrow crevice in the hillside, hidden by a curtain of vines. Anansi slipped through, and Akua pushed the vines aside, her breath catching as she stepped into a cave. The air was cool and damp, the walls glistening with moisture that reflected the flickering light of torches. Shadows moved within, tall figures cloaked in dark robes, their voices low and urgent. At the center stood Kofi, his straw hat gone, his tunic replaced with a simple brown wrap. In his hands, he held a small leather pouch, and as Aqua watched, he tipped it onto a wooden table. Gold nuggets tumbled out, glinting like stars fallen to earth. The traders, 3 men with weathered faces and belts heavy with cowrie shells, leaned forward, their eyes greedy. One scooped up a nugget, testing its weight, while another nodded and pushed forward a sack of salt, its grains spilling onto the table. "Good trade," the first man grunted, his voice rough as gravel. Kofi said nothing, only nodded, his face calm but his hands steady as he gathered the salt. Aqua's breath stopped. Gold! Kofi, the yam farmer, trading gold in a hidden cave? Her mind spun like a top, questions crashing against each other. Where had he gotten it? Why hide it? She crouched behind a rock, her body trembling, as Anansi perched beside her, his eyes twinkling with delight. "See," he whispered, his voice dripping with glee. "Your husband is no simple man. Gold flows through his hands like water, yet he sleeps in a mud hut. What a fool, or what a trickster, eh?" Aqua's fists clenched, the necklace digging into her palm. "Why?" she hissed. "Why pretend to be poor?" Anansi chuckled, scuttling closer. "Ask him yourself, little wife. Or let me spin the tale for you, Kofi, the secret king, the hidden heir, the man who plays poor to fool the world. But beware, truth comes with a sting." His grin widened, sharp and wicked. Before she could answer, Kofi turned, his eyes scanning the cave. Aqua ducked lower, her heart hammering, but he didn't see her. He gathered his goods, salt, a small jar of oil, and slipped out through a back passage, the traders following. The cave fell silent, the torches guttering low. Aqua rose, her legs shaky, and glared at Anansi. "Is this true?" she demanded. "Or is this one of your lies?" Anansi tilted his head, his web swaying. True enough, true enough. But what will you do with it, Confront him? Run to the village? Oh, the fun we'll have." He laughed, a sound that grated on her nerves, then darted into the shadows, leaving her alone. The walk back to the hut was a blur, the night pressing in around her. By the time she slipped inside, Kofi was there, asleep on the mat, his breathing slow and even. The sack of salt sat in the corner, innocent as a pile of yams. Aqua stood over him, her mind a storm. She wanted to shake him awake, demand answers, but fear held her back. What if he lied again? What if Anansi had tricked her? The next morning, as the sun climbed over the hills, Aqua faced Kofi over a breakfast of yam porridge. He ate quietly, his eyes on his bowl, while she stirred hers without tasting it. At last, she could bear it no longer. "Kofi," she said, her voice sharp as a blade, "where do you go at night?" He paused, his spoon halfway to his mouth, then set it down. "To check the fields," he said, his tone even. "The pests come out in the dark." "Liar," she snapped, slamming her bowl on the stool. "I saw you in a cave, with gold and traders. What are you hiding?" Kofi's eyes widened, just for a moment, then softened. "You followed me?" he asked, his voice low. "I had to know," she said, her chest tight. "You bring rice, bangles, salt, things no farmer finds. Tell me the truth, Kofi, or I'll tell the village you're a thief." He sighed, rubbing his hands together, the roughness of his palms rasping like sand. "It's not what you think, Aqua. I trade, yes, but it's honest. I found a small vein of gold in the hills years ago. I use it to help us, to buy what we need. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to marry me for it." Aqua stared, her anger faltering. "Gold! You have gold, and we live like this." She gestured at the cracked walls, the bare floor. "I wanted a simple life," he said, meeting her gaze. "Gold brings trouble, greed, envy. I've seen it ruin men. I only take what we need." She shook her head, disbelief warring with his calm words. "You're lying. No one hides wealth like that for no reason." Before he could answer, a cackle echoed from the roof. Anansi dangled there, his web glinting in the morning light. "Oh, what a tangle," he crowed. "He says one thing, you say another. Who's right, little wife? Maybe he's a thief, or maybe I've spun you a web of doubt. Be gone, spider," Kofi shouted, grabbing a broom to swipe at him. Anansi dodged, laughing, and vanished out the door. But his words lingered, poisoning the air. That night, Aqua lay awake, her mind churning. Kofi's story made sense, yet it didn't. Why hide so much? Why the secrecy? As sleep finally claimed her, the air grew warm, and a soft glow filled the hut. She opened her eyes to a dream, or so it seemed. Before her stood her grandmother, Nana Adwoa, who had passed 5 rains ago. Her white robes shimmered like moonlight, and her eyes were kind but stern. "Aqua, my child," Nana Adwoa said, her voice a whisper of wind through the palms. "You chase shadows and listen to a spider's lies. Patience is your strength, not haste. The heart sees what the eyes cannot. Trust, and wait." Aqua reached out, but the vision faded, leaving her in darkness. She woke with a start, the hut silent, Kofi's breathing steady beside her. Nana's words echoed in her ears, clashing with Anansi's taunts and Kofi's half-truths. Trust him? Wait. Or confront him again. The suspense tightened around her like a vine, and she knew the truth was still out of reach. The days that followed were heavy with tension. Aqua watched Kofi closely, her eyes sharp as a hawk's, but he went about his work as if nothing had changed, tending the yams, mending the hut, sharing his quiet smiles. She said little, her mind a battlefield of doubt and Nana Adwoa's words. Trust and wait, the spirit had said, but Anansi's cackle haunted her, whispering of secrets still hidden. The village buzzed on, unaware, the sun rising and setting over the fields, the river glinting like a silver thread through the land. Then, one morning, a shout broke the peace. Aqua was pounding yam in the courtyard when a group of villagers stormed toward the hut, their faces twisted with anger. At their head was Kwame, a burly man with a voice like thunder, his staff raised high. Torches flickered in their hands, though the sun was bright, and their shouts carried on the wind. "Kofi!" Kwame bellowed, banging his staff on the ground. "Come out, thief. We know your game." Kofi stepped from the hut, his hoe in hand, his face calm but his eyes wary. Aqua dropped her pestle, her heart racing. "What's this?" she demanded, stepping beside him. Kwame pointed at Kofi, his glare fierce. "He's been seen sneaking into the hills, trading gold stolen from the king's mines. Anansi told us, said he's been hoarding wealth while we starve." The crowd roared, their voices a storm of accusations. "Thief! Liar! Give us the gold!" Children peeked from behind their mothers, wide-eyed, while elders muttered prayers to the ancestors. Aqua's breath caught Anansi. She scanned the trees and saw him, perched on a branch, his web swaying as he laughed. "Anansi lies," she shouted, but her voice was drowned by the mob. Kofi raised a hand, his presence steady as a rock. "I've stolen nothing," he said, his tone firm. "Take me to the king. Let him judge." The villagers seized him, binding his wrists with rope, and marched him toward the palace, a grand structure of mud and stone at the heart of Adinkra. Aqua followed, her mind spinning. Anansi had twisted her discovery into a weapon, but why? Revenge for her doubt? Or another of his games? She glared at the spider as they passed, but he only winked, scuttling higher. The king's court was a marvel, its walls painted with scenes of warriors and spirits, its roof held by carved pillars shaped like elephants. The king, Osei, sat on a throne of polished wood draped with leopard skins, his Kent robe a blaze of gold and red. His crown gleamed with cowrie shells, and his eyes were sharp as he surveyed the crowd. Guards in leather armor stood at his sides, their spears glinting in the torchlight that lit the hall. Kwame shoved Kofi forward, bowing low. "Great King Osei," he said, "this man steals from your mines. Anansi saw him trading gold in the hills. We demand justice. The king leaned forward, his gaze piercing Kofi. Speak, farmer. What say you? Kofi straightened, his bound hands steady. I am no thief, my king. The gold is mine, found in a vein my father showed me before he died. I trade it for goods to help my family, not to hoard or harm. Lies. Kwame shouted, but the king silenced him with a wave. Proof, Osei said. Bring me proof, or your life is forfeit. Kofi nodded, turning to Akua. In the hut, under the mat, fetch the box, Akua. Hurry. She ran, her feet pounding the earth, the crowd's murmurs chasing her. In the hut, she tore up the mat, revealing a patch of loose dirt. Digging with her hands, she uncovered a small wooden box, its lid carved with a sunburst. She raced back, clutching it tight, and thrust it into Kofi's hands. He opened it before the king, revealing a golden seal, a disc etched with the royal crest, a lion beneath a baobab tree. The crowd gasped, and Osei's eyes widened. He took the seal, turning it in his hands, then stood, his voice booming. This is the mark of my brother's line, lost 20 years ago when he fled the palace to live among the people. You are his son. Kofi bowed. I am, my king. My father hid his wealth and taught me humility. I kept it secret to honor him, to live simply, as he wished, until the time was right. Akua's knees weakened, her breath stolen. Kofi, a prince. The poor farmer she'd scorned was royal blood, his patched tunic a disguise for a fortune. She stared at him, his quiet strength now blazing like the sun, and shame burned in her chest. She had doubted him, judged him, while he bore a burden she couldn't see. Osei clapped his hands, a smile breaking his stern face. The lost heir returns. Let the kingdom rejoice. The guards cut Kofi's ropes, and the crowd's anger turned to awe. Kwame slunk back, muttering, while Anansi, perched on a pillar, hissed in frustration. That night, a festival lit the village square. Bonfires roared, their flames licking the sky, and drums thundered as dancers spun in circles, their Kent cloth flashing like fireflies. Kofi and Akua stood at the center, dressed in robes gifted by the king, his gold and green, hers crimson and white. Bells jingled on her ankles, and the silver bangle gleamed on her wrist, no longer a mystery but a symbol of truth. She turned to him, her voice soft. Why didn't you tell me? Kofi smiled, his eyes warm. I wanted you to see me, Akua, not the gold, not the title. A man's worth is in his heart, not his hands. She nodded, tears pricking her eyes. She had chased wealth, blinded by dreams, while he had given her something greater, patience, trust, a lesson carved in the firelight. The ancestors had guided her, through Nana Adwoa's wisdom, to this moment. As the dancers whirled, Anansi sulked under a palm tree, his web tangled in the wind. Outwitted by a farmer, he grumbled. Bah! I'll spin a better tale next time. But no one heard him, lost in the joy of the night. The moral settled over the village like dawn. True wealth lies not in gold or status, but in the quiet strength of the soul. Akua had learned to see beyond appearances, and Adinkra celebrated a prince who chose humility over pride.